What's up, Midnight Mafia? Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I have a really interesting story for you. But before we begin, make sure to hit that like button and check out my brand new channel. Yes, the brand new channel, Shadows in the Wild, which will have its second story up Sunday, so in 2 days or a day. The channel, as you know, called Shadows in the Wild. And not only that, because my podcast officially drops tonight. So search Mystery Files with Mystery, Mysterious, True Crime, and Paranormal Stories to find it. I will put it up on the screen right now. It will be on all major platforms, Spotify, Apple, and others. And the links for both of them will be at the top in the description. But without any further ado, as of now, it's time to slip into a mind that's not our own. Let's go. On a scorching hot January day in 1991, a man was found just wandering aimlessly in the desert, and about 30 miles from Las Vegas. And he was hardly dressed for the occasion. He was dressed in 3 layers of clothing, despite the hot heat. He carried no identification card and seemed to have absolutely no idea where he was. Not only that, he didn't know who he was. And the man was, in his early 20s and was rushed immediately to a hospital where he was diagnosed with extreme dehydration and effects of exposure. Doctors thought that he had been out in the desert for at least 3 days. Nonetheless, he was expected to make a full recovery. All he needed was a period of rest and recuperation. But later that night, the man woke up in a panic. He seemed confused, frightened, and just intimidated by his surroundings. So the following day, he was assessed by a psychologist who said that he was suffering from a psychogenic amnesia. This is a condition brought on by emotional trauma. And over the days that followed, he gradually, regained his strength, but his memories were nowhere to be found. And he could not remember a single thing about his past and had no idea how he ended up in that desert. Hospital staff eventually gave this man the identity as Tyler. They also enrolled him into a state program for special needs adults, which provided him with a job and an apartment. In the meantime, though, the Las Vegas Police Department was conducting their own inquiries, bumping up against roadblocks at literally every turn, because no missing persons report had been filed on anyone matching Tyler's description. And his fingerprints did not appear on any database, not with the FBI, the Department of Defense, or any law enforcement agency at all. The only small clue came from his medical records. Doctors found hairline fractures on his knuckles, suggesting that he'd been involved in physical altercations in the past, maybe like a fighter. There was also an old gunshot wound on his right thigh. Neither of these came anywhere to unlocking his identity, though. But then a breakthrough did occur. It came during a group therapy session at the hospital when Tyler struck up this conversation with a fellow patient. And the other man was from San Diego, and when he started talking about his hometown, Tyler just lit up, because he recognized many of the places that this man was describing and became convinced that he had lived there too. So eager to explore the possibility, doctors decided to put Tyler under hypnosis. And these sessions would provide stunning details. Okay, so at first Tyler, in hypnosis, starts to describe the beaches and neighborhoods of San Diego. It seemed clear that he had definitely been there before. However, he seemed particularly familiar with the city's military bases, particularly the North Island Naval Air Station. He also remembered a Coast Guard airfield and a hangar just across from Lindbergh Field. He even recalled that there was this gate that was open to bring planes across the Harbor Boulevard. And then Tyler started describing the city of San Diego, but from a different vantage point. He began describing it from the air, and that filled him with the certainty that he must have been a trained pilot. After the hypnosis session ended, he suggested that, getting behind the controls of an airplane might, trigger his memories to come back. And of course, no one was going to just let him fly a plane on his own, but arrangements were made to send him up with an instructor. And Tyler just seemed immediately at home in the cockpit of the aircraft, pointing out various controls and describing exactly what they did. In fact, the instructor was so impressed by his knowledge of the aircraft that he allowed him to take control of the flight midair. And Tyler wasn't just able to fly it, he was able to land it on his own as well. The instructor was convinced that he had flown before. But that was only the first startling revelation to come out about this man called Tyler. Over the months that followed, it emerged that he could literally dismantle and then rebuild a race car engine. He also was highly trained in scuba diving, martial arts, and computer programming. And even more astonishingly, Tyler had intimate knowledge of the bombing mechanisms found on the US Navy's A-6 attack airplane. It's like this guy was straight out of the Matrix. But if you put all this together, it suggests that he had high-level military training. Perhaps he was special forces, or maybe even a spy. And yet neither the military or the CIA had no record of him. Tyler was legitimately a man without a background. A man truly without a history at all. And then, out of the blue, the riddle of Tyler's identity was solved. You see, the television program Unsolved Mysteries had taken an interest into his case and agreed to film a segment on it. And on that night that the segment hit the airwaves, a man called in claiming that Tyler was his son. And according to the caller, Tyler's real name was Arthur Paul Beale. Friends and family, though, called him by his middle name, Paul. He was 23 years old and he had a wife and 2 children, although the marriage was in trouble and headed for the divorce courts. Contrary to what everybody had assumed, he was not from San Diego, but Boise, Idaho. So what was Paul Beale's background? Was he some high-level military operative as everyone speculated? No, Paul was a salesman for a food supply company. Not only that, but there was a warrant out for his arrest. On January 5th, 1991, he left the company's depot driving a refrigerated truck carrying a shipment of frozen seafood. The truck was then reported stolen later that night, and nearly 3 weeks later, on January 25th, Beale surfaced with the empty truck in Boulder City, Nevada, where he was actually pulled over and questioned by the police. He claimed that the situation with the missing truckload of seafood was just a mistake and that he was going to return to Boise to, sort it out. And the cops believed him and allowed him to go on his way. And then 3 days later, he was found in the middle of the desert. So at this point, Paul Beale was arrested by the North Las Vegas Police Department on the warrant from Boise. And then the next day, his mother, Lynn, bailed him out. And the reunion was nothing but tense. I mean, Lynn was emotional, Paul was distant, claiming that he didn't recognize her at all. And despite Lynn's pleas for him to return home, Paul kind of remained detached. His father believed that the amnesia was a ploy to avoid arrest. But in November 1991, Paul pled guilty to petty theft in Boise, serving 90 days in jail. His father's restitution payment saved him from harder punishment. But Paul's troubles were not over. His father's refusal to believe the amnesia story created this rift between them, leading Paul to leave Boise for Danville, California, where he actually took up bartending and then began calling himself Tyler Beale because he liked the name better. And Paul's life continued to spiral. He divorced his wife, rarely visited his kids, and was even forced by court order to pay the child support. But not all was bad, because in California now he started a new life with a new family, and for a while his life seemed to kinda stabilize. But in November 2007, Tyler Beale's luck took another dark turn. At just 39 years old, he suffered a massive heart attack, leaving him permanently disabled and wheelchair bound. Unable to care for himself, he was moved to an assisted living facility where he actually remains today. Questions still swirl around Tyler's story. Was this a true case of amnesia or an elaborate con? Believe it or not, many, including his own father and ex-wife, believe that he faked it. But why? The crime wasn't severe enough to warrant such drastic measures. And what happened those 3 days in the desert? Maybe Tyler initially believed his charges were worse than they were, or perhaps his memory loss was genuine, but as fragments kind of returned, he chose to play along. I mean, the allure of a new life might have been more tempting than facing the wreckage that he left back in Boise. But there are even bigger mysteries to be unraveled. How did Tyler acquire military skills that he displayed? I mean, some of it can be explained by the 3 years that he served as a sonar tech in the Navy. I mean, that might account for his familiarity with the plane and scuba techniques. And he'd been stationed actually in San Diego, which explains the knowledge of that area. But what about his intense martial arts skills? And what about his ability to fly a plane despite never receiving one single flight lesson? What about the computer programming and the ability to take a race car and basically build the engine from scratch? Well, only Tyler knows the answers to those questions. And Tyler isn't saying anything. This man just might be the oddest man in history. But at least he was found after those 3 days. But if you like cases of the unknown and want to hear a real head scratcher, make sure to click right here and check this one out. That's all I got for you guys today. I'll see you next time. Cheers.